Welcome to the Sanity Project podcast, where you can awaken your mind to clarity and success even in today's life challenges. We're here to provide insights and solutions that will help you live a sane, healthy, and prosperous life. Here's your host, Joanne Victoria.
Hi, this is Joanne Victoria with another great episode of the Sanity Project podcast. I am delighted to have as our guest today, Benjamin Farrey-Latz, L-A-T-Z. Benjamin has written a book called I Can Learn Social Skills. Poem is about getting along, being a good friend, and growing up. Now, this book was written for Benjamin's audience, which are grades 2 through 5. And 2 is what, age 6?
About 7 or 8.
7 or 8 through 12? No, not that high.
Yeah, but I think you can go a little bit younger and a little bit older. I think they've been.
So 7 to 11, more or less. And everybody's wondering, why do I have a grade school teacher here today? Well, Benjamin is special in that the book that he has written and the topic that he's talking about are calming strategies. And adults today, especially in the workplace, or those who stay home and take care of their children all day long, male or female, always get into difficult situations and they need to stay calm. And Benjamin is going to talk with us today about that. Benjamin is a special education teacher with Minneapolis Public Schools, grades 2 through 5, and he has worked in education since 1996 in private, public, and charter schools as both the general and special education teacher. After working several years at the elementary level, Benjamin completed his master's degree at the University of Minnesota. His thesis focused on methods of teaching social skills to children with special needs. And I am so grateful that you are here today because this topic is going to be important for the adults that are listening and also for the adults who have children or who have nieces or nephews or grandchildren who may need to also learn from you. So tell me, Benjamin, how did you get on this path to dealing with social skills with young people?
Well, I have always been kind of interested in social skills as part of education. I, as you said in my bio, I taught general education for several years, working with, I worked mainly with kids in second grade, a little bit in first grade. And it's always been something that's interesting to me. I know as a kid, I had my own issues with social skills, as a lot of kids do, and just figuring out ways around being a good friend and, you know, all the different things that go along with kind of interacting with other people. And I think that a lot of times as adults, we take for granted that certain things are just really easy, that kids should just know them, and also that other adults should know them. And I think that a lot of times social skills are not as obvious as everyone thinks. There's also cultural differences that play in. That's touched on a little bit in my book too. But I think it's just, as I've worked with kids and seen what kind of issues and concerns that they have and what things come up, and I think that all the calming strategies can be used for both kids and adults. I often model the strategies for my students. And I think, you know, once I started specializing and working with students with autism, that also puts social skills kind of at the forefront of one of their needs, and working on what social skills they need to build and helping them to kind of get by. So when I was going through my master's program, as you mentioned, my master's thesis was all about social skills. And that just kind of helps further kind of fire my passion for working with kids on helping them to make friends and be better friends. And then on top of that is just the different strategies for staying calm in different situations. And so, yeah, several of the poems kind of deal with different strategies for how can I get through this situation and how can I calm myself down in different ways.
Well, I could see where some of the things you've said are applicable to adults as well, because most of the adults in the workplace today, the younger adults, 20s, 30s, and maybe even 40s, we're not taught social skills. It's, as you say, there's an assumption that people know what to do. Children know what to do, and they don't. I remember when I was in school, I didn't know how to make friends. I just did not know how. You know, I came from, there was just my brother and myself in our immediate family, but I was surrounded by cousins on both sides of the family. But, you know, it's like any group of people, you know, there are cliques within cliques and so on and so forth. So you sort of have to, I had to observe for a long time to see who was what and where and why and who you could sit at the lunch table and so on, because nobody showed us how. Mm-hmm. And I'm grateful that you're out there doing that and that you have a book to back that up. And I know that even today, adults have an issue. For example, just came to me, and I tend to do that. I do a lot of my social media on LinkedIn, and people will ask to connect. And then I'll, you know, look and determine whether they would be a good connection. And then the first thing they do after they connect is try to sell me something. And with one guy who was very aggressive, I said, it's too soon. I said, I have not even met you yet. And this was all in print, of course, because there was no verbal communication. I said, it's too soon. You're going to have to wait until I know more about you before I would even, you know, consider. There's that, I don't know what that rush is, the rush to fit in, the rush to succeed, the rush to be a part of something, or I don't know what it is. I just look at it as somebody came at me with a sale before I even got my name out. And that's disconcerting.
Yeah. And I think that is, something about, people, everything seems to be how fast we can get it done and how fast we can do things. And just sometimes people need to take a breath and slow down and just kind of, you know, build a relationship, build a friendship, and not just jump into what can I get from you?
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely something that, adults definitely can have a issue with. And it kind of goes into, it's like, I've got a poem about personal space, but there's also that personal space of like just what's appropriate in terms of conversation too, not just like getting into people's physical space, but kind of just getting too close to people, trying to like push something too fast.
Yeah, I was surprised that those words even came out of my finger on my keyboard, because it was like that was what I felt. And I just had to make that statement to him that, you know, I didn't say you're pushing me. I didn't, you know, get nasty or mean or rude or anything like that. I just said, it's too soon. It was like way too soon.
Yeah.
I mean, the way he said it, because a lot of other people, they do the same thing. You know, they, instead of, it's just too much. So tell me about a recent situation where you were working with one or more kids about social skills.
It's pretty frequent with my job working with different kids, and I've have certain kids that I guess just going in on the personal space issue. Just I have a lot of kids that are very some of my kids are very really like to touch and like to get in other people's space. Like I have a student who he really likes to give hugs, and so his version of a hug would be pulling my head down, but that was a hug to him.
Okay.
And while it's like cute in the classroom as a teacher, it's one of those things where he can't just go up to people on the street and do that.
Right.
So we've had to kind of talk about, appropriate touch and asking to touch. And that's been kind of a big thing with a few of my students of just kind of working on, you can't just go up and touch someone, you have to ask. And another one of my students has kind of the same thing. He would just go up and touch people and hug them. And, we really worked on, you have to ask first. And one of my students has actually gotten really good about saying, can I give you a hug, or can I give you a high five or whatever? But that is something that, but I see that even with adults. Like last night I was in a social setting where I saw some people just coming up to someone they'd never met before, and they were putting their arm on his shoulder or patting his back, and I'm just kind of like, you just met this person. Maybe you should ask before you start touching them. I'm just assuming it's okay to touch them, but
I see that. Excuse me. I see that too on television, for example. It might be not reality, but some situations I see that, and I see people putting their hands on somebody's shoulder, and I'm going, "Don't touch her." You know, I'm shouting at the television because it's premature, and I think that's why we have the old-fashioned handshake. You know, at least that's a way to make a connection, but you don't go touching strangers.
Yeah, and that's one thing too. Like, it's funny you mention that, because there's one of the first poems that's about greeting people. You know, just as the editing process goes, when you're going back and forth with an editor, the original poem had a whole section on nonverbal ways to greet, and appropriate ways to greet, like giving a high five or waving at someone or things like that. And that at some point in the editing process got lost, but that is something that I think is important to have out there, is that there are nonverbal ways to greet, and there are ways to do things appropriately without just jumping into someone's space.
I agree with you. Tell me about calming strategies and how, I mean, you just mentioned one actually, when you talked about the child who wanted to give you a hug by pulling down your head, which I can understand, believe it or not. I don't know why. I just, you know, I talk to kids as if they are adults, so I don't have that much of an issue with them. But I can see a child doing that because he's touching an important part of the body, actually. You know, and to them, there's I think it's an instinct. So talk to me about a calming strategy that you use for children, the ones that you deal with, grade 2 to 5, but that it would also be transferable to adults, because adults today are they're very angry, for one, all of them. I think that, and they're afraid, which is the split side of anger. They're really in fear because they don't know how to handle all the minutia that's coming after them, because they choose not to ignore it, but they choose to engage. My first, word of advice is to ignore things that have nothing to do with you. But how can these people learn to calm down? How do you deal with the children?
We use like a variety of different techniques. Some are just different breathing exercises, and I've gotten from various sources. Like, there's a website called Go Noodle that has a lot of videos that they have a whole section that are like calming ones, and there's things like, you can say just take some deep breaths, but to make it more interesting, there's one like that's called a rainbow breath, where you move your hands kind of out and up and back and down. So like kind of like you move your arms in kind of like a rainbow arc,
right,
as you're breathing. I've done one. There's
doing
one
it right now.
Yeah. There's one that they do on that same website that's called bunny breaths, where they do it's like a short breath in and then 3 out, and that's supposed to be one for when you're kind of amped up and need to calm down. And so there's one that I've done called a volcano breath, where you make your hands like a volcano exploding, and there's a whole variety of those that you can do, and there's plenty of resources out there that have different versions of just breathing in and breathing out. And if you're in the middle of an office and you don't want to do something that's using your hands too much, you can just do the breathing in and out, or counting slowly to 10 in your head, or even whisper it. So I think the breathing is the first part to start with. And at one training I was at, I believe they said you need to do at least 5 deep breaths in and out before you'll feel an effect. So people that just try and do 1 or 2 deep breaths and say they're done, that's not going to do it. You need to kind of do at least 5 to kind of start feeling some effect.
Yeah, it takes a while, especially if you're doing diaphragmatic breathing. You can't even barely take a breath in 2 breaths. I mean, it takes that much just to get your body to pay attention to what your mind's trying to tell it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think just the breathing, the counting to 10, for some people, if you're in a position where you can walk away or just take a quick walk or do something physical, that can really help people too. Like just getting some of that physical energy out. And sometimes, obviously that's going to be hard in some situations if you're in like a big meeting that you can't leave. But if you're in a position where you can just take a quick walk and say, maybe even call it a bathroom break, say I'm walking to the bathroom and I'll be right back.
Oh yeah, that's my favorite. That's what I tell people. I say go to the bathroom, because nobody's going to say you can't go to the bathroom.
So you just get a chance to get yourself out of the situation briefly, and because like you mentioned, ignoring can work sometimes, and other times it doesn't help. But it just depends on the situation. I think ignoring is one of those that's easier said than done.
Right.
But I think that, it is something that we tell kids a lot, is just try to ignore it. Or, sometimes we talk about things like self-coaching, like just kind of talking to yourself. Like if someone's saying something about you, you just say, just to yourself in your own head, just say, that's not true. I can do this, or this might not be my strongest thing, but I can do this other thing, or kind of talking yourself around what's happening. And if, in addition to self-coaching, just finding someone else that you trust, like, as an adult, find another adult that you trust to just talk it through and kind of talk yourself down, or have them help you talk it down with the kids. I'll say, like maybe talk to an adult or a friend that you trust, that you can kind of talk through whatever happened that made you angry or upset.
Well, these tactics that you've just spoke about are not much different than what I write about, because when I'm talking about people who have issues at work, and I advise them to leave their place, and if they can't leave, just say they're going to the bathroom, and then go to the bathroom and breathe. And then if they need to talk to someone, if they have a friend at work that they can trust, just talk to them about a different topic. Don't talk to them about the problem, because you'll just reinforce that, but just talk about something else to take your mind off of it.
Mm-hmm. And distraction is definitely a technique that can be great with some kids, like just getting them onto something else. And again, with adults too, just like, sometimes it's just in the middle of a kid having a meltdown, I might just say something silly, or say something in a silly voice, or, if it's a child that you have a relationship with, maybe you can give them a hug or something, if that's something that is safe and that's something that they are comfortable with, or just something that just to kind of bring something else out, or just kind of shift it, or just maybe, bring out some sort of object or toy that they like, and just kind of something to kind of distract or move on. And I think that's something that can really help diffuse when people are feeling really strong emotions, is just some sort of distraction, whether it's verbal or something visual that they can look at or do. I have some of my kids, if they're upset, I'll put on a video that I know they like. We have a Promethean board, like one of those big giant whiteboards in our room that
Sure.
I can just like throw on like a calming video, or a video that I know that of a character that I know they like, that might just distract them from what's causing them to be upset. And so when that's, available, that can be something that's good, just to get your mind off it for a little bit.
Well, I think if people are at work and they have the problem, they can find something on their computer that'll do the same thing for them.
Right.
A similar thing, I should say. It'll just be something to get them out of their head and out of their issue and into a different place. So you're dealing with children that are you still teaching grades 2 through 5?
Yep. I still have those grade levels. So I'll be starting up a new school year in about 3 or 4 weeks now. So
right.
Get ready. So, and my age group will be 2nd through 4th or 2nd through 5th. It just kind of depends on numbers. Well, sometimes we don't know until the year actually starts our exact makeup of student.
Right. So I'm looking at 2 through... Okay, so what is the difference, do you think, between the 7-year-old-ish, 7-year-old in the grade 2 and the 10-year-old in grade 5?
I think as you get to grade 5, it's where they're just starting to look more towards the peers for guidance than the adults.
Okay.
When I taught second grade exclusively, I used to say that what I loved about that age is that they were at a point where they could do things for themselves, but they still looked at you as like the superhero as the teacher. Doesn't mean they always listen to you or follow your directions, but you're still kind of like the superhuman as a teacher.
Right.
By the time they're getting into 5th or 6th grade, they're starting to look more towards the peers as their guides as opposed to the adults. And I think that's the kind of the biggest shift you see as we're getting into those upper elementary and definitely into middle school. Definitely in middle school, it's much more about what the peers are expecting than what the teacher's expecting.
Amazing how that works, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think that's the biggest shift that I see in those age levels.
I relate that to when I'm relating that to a work environment. When people first start a new job, they're looking at their boss, be it a director or another manager, for direction.
Mm-hmm.
And then once they get that usually takes whatever, depends on what they're working on, 30, maybe 60 days, but let's say 30 days. After that, that doesn't continue. They look towards their peers for what's going on, truly what's going on. What's the truth about the company? What can you tell me about so-and-so? That kind of thing, that they don't confide in the adult. I'll just name the manager as the adult, as opposed to, they just stay with someone on their own, a similar level.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're saying, it's totally comparable to a work environment. Or almost any, except in the very high levels.
Yeah. And I think in a work environment, that's another place to look at how you have to be flexible, because when you're talking about listening to different managers versus different peers, like everyone's going to have different styles, whether it be the people you're working with that are on, your same level in the company, the people that are above you. It's, learning that this manager might have a different style than that manager, and how do I adapt to what their strategy is or what their managerial style is. But also when you have to work in teams or in groups, like you need to learn about how different people operate, and, who, regardless of how well you mesh with those other people, if you're in a work situation, you're going to have to learn to get along with them, even if they're not your best friend. And that's something that, kids have to learn, that you're going to be in a classroom with someone who might not be your best friend, but you still have to treat them with a certain amount of respect, which is something that, I have taught some of my kids that are, in upper grades, that are at a level where they can kind of grasp that. I'll say, in school, you might not like this other kid, but you have to treat them with respect when you're in the school, and you have to be, I'm not telling you have to like this other person, but you do have to at least treat them with some level of respect. And I'll even tell some of these older kids, like, this is going to translate to when you're working. You can't just go to your manager and start yelling at them because you don't like what they did. You can't go and start yelling at another coworker because you don't agree with how they did their job. You have to find ways to do this respectfully, or in the real world, you could lose your job.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that, I go over a lot with my kids, is that this is preparing you for the real world. You are going to be working with people you don't like at times, or that you have trouble getting along with, but you have to find ways to work with them in a respectful way, or know what to do if you can't. Even as an adult, there are situations where you might need to go to someone else to say, hey, I need help working with this person. I think a lot of adults have had experiences, a lot, if not all, have had experiences working with someone where they get to a point where, like, I don't know how to work with this person and I need help. And so I think it's important that, especially little kids are pretty good about knowing that they can ask other people for help. But I think as people get older, that becomes harder and harder, realizing that it's okay to ask for help, whether it's what your job duties are, or whether it's just, I'm having trouble with interacting with this other person and I'm not sure what I can do to help the situation. Right? That I think asking for help is another really important thing. And, there is a poem in my book about that too, but I think that's how that one can apply to adults is just.
Oh, totally. Totally. I mean, everything that you're saying is applicable to adults in most situations. You have to be kind, respectful, and get along with people that you may not like.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
That's what life is all about. And I guess the older you get, the more complex it gets, unless you stop at a certain age and don't grow anymore. I'm so glad that you're out there doing this, and I know the parents who are listening are also glad, and they have some more tactics to apply for their kids, and the strategies that you've shared, plus your book, I Can Learn Social Skills, ! Poem is about getting along, being a good friend, and growing up. The publisher is Free Spirit, and I will include that link in your bio, but it's also available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and also on your website, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, I've got the links on my website, which is just benjaminfarreylatz.com, no hyphen, in the website name. And yeah, there's down at the bottom of the first page of the website, there's a link to Free Spirit, to IndieBound, which is, if you want to, I'm always for supporting independent bookstores, so I put the Free Spirit first, then IndieBound, and then I've got the links for Barnes & Noble and Amazon as well.
Right.
Those are all there on the website.
I'm going to spell your name for the listeners because I'm going to spell your name with your email address. In case those of you who are listening want to contact Benjamin now, his email address is benjamin.latz. Benjamin, BenjaminJamin .Latz as in zebra @gmail.com. Is there a final strategy, a good strategy, another good strategy, I would say, that you can give to our listeners right now? And I'm going to tell listeners, I always do, I remember for every podcast episode, re-listen to this podcast. Because if you listen too quickly, you're going to miss some great points that Benjamin is making for the listeners here. I fortunately am able to take notes, and I can re-listen to this many times, which I will do before it's edited, and not much. And you need to listen to this. You need to re-listen. And after you re-listen, go to iTunes and give Benjamin a great review. I think it's turned into Apple, no longer iTunes, but the listeners will figure that out for themselves. So give me one more strategy, or one strategy that you right now think is a great strategy for children and adults.
I would say just to, and I may have touched on this a little bit before, but just to give yourself some space and give yourself some time to just think things through. I think I touched on the rushing before, but just kind of like, especially when your emotions are up, give yourself the time to just calm down for a minute before you respond. Don't rush to respond to everything, but just kind of give yourself some time to take things in and just, use what calming strategies work for you, whether they're physical or, like going for a walk, going to the gym, whatever kind of things help you kind of work through that extra energy. Just give yourself some time. It doesn't have to be a rush.
Yeah, there's nothing to rush for anymore. Okay, everybody, you have been listening to Benjamin Farrey-Latz, who is a teacher in Minneapolis and public school grades 2 through 5, and he has just given some great ideas about how to remain calm in many different situations, and these strategies apply to children and adults. I thank you, Benjamin, for being here today. This has been great. This is my kind of content, and everybody have a great day. Benjamin and I say, fare thee well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Sanity Project podcast. Please go to AskJoanneVictoria.com to listen to more podcasts. Check out Joanne's coaching programs and get a free copy of her report, 5 Steps to Achieve Life-Work Harmony. That's AskJoanneVictoria.com. Take care, and thanks for being here.